It was a bright and sunny morning when our biology teacher, Mr. Thompson, announced the much anticipated school trip. We have been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Me and my friend Rick was so much excited as this week our school trip is going to be an amazing place. We'll have so much fun there, Rick said with a twinkle of excitement in his eye. Then, leaning in a bit closer, he added, I heard about an abandoned place nearby. We should go explore it. We won't tell anyone. When everyone falls asleep, we'll sneak out for a while and then come back before anyone notices. It'll be our little adventure. Why would I say no? I needed friends. And this sounded like an exciting escapade. The trip day finally came, and we all boarded the bus, buzzing with excitement. The air was filled with anticipation, and everyone was in high spirits. We sang songs the whole way, our voices blending into a chorus of youthful energy. Laughter echoed through the bus as we shared stories and jokes, the scenery outside rushing past in a blur of green and blue. When we arrived at the campsite, it was even more amazing than I had imagined. Nestled deep in the forest, the campsite featured a beautiful lake, its crystal clear wafers reflecting the towering mountains that surrounded it. The air was fresh and crisp, filled with the scent of pine trees and the sound of birds chirping. We spent the day exploring the area, hiking through the woods, and discovering hidden trails that led to breathtaking viewpoints. The lake was perfect for swimming, and we splashed around, enjoying the cool water under the warm sun. Some of us tried our hand at fishing, while others set up a volleyball net and organized impromptu games on the grassy field. As the day wore on, we gathered around picnic tables for lunch, sharing sandwiches, snacks, and stories. The camaraderie was palpable, and it felt like we were all part of something special. There were moments of quiet reflection by the lake, as well as bursts of laughter and excitement as we competed in various games and activities. As evening approached, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. We gathered around the campfire. We roasted marshmallows, sang songs, and the crackling fire adding a magical touch to the night. The warmth of the fire and the glow of the flames created a cozy atmosphere, and we shared ghost stories and tales of adventure. It was a perfect end to a perfect day, and we all felt a sense of contentment and belonging. The bonds we formed that day felt strong and enduring, and it seemed like we had known each other forever. Laughter and chatter filled the air as we shared stories and jokes, our voices blending harmoniously with the natural symphony of chirping crickets and rustling leaves. Yet, each rustle of the leaves or distant hoot of an owl seemed magnified in the silence between our tales, reminding us of the presence of the unknown in the darkened forest around us. As twilight deepened into night, the stars emerged one by one, twinkling brightly overhead like distant beacons. The moon, a luminous crescent, cast its silvery glow upon the calm surface of the nearby lake, turning it into a mirror of shimmering light that seemed to reflect the mysterious depths of the forest. The trees, standing tall and imposing, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to sway with a life of their own. Each shadowy movement, each flicker of movement at the edge of our vision stirred our imaginations. Despite the warmth of the fire and the laughter that filled the air, there was an underlying sense of mystery and intrigue that hung over us like a veil. The forest, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the canopy above, took on an otherworldly quality. The rustling of leaves became whispers of secrets that carried on the wind. As night fell and everyone began to drift off to sleep, Rick gave me a knowing nod. One by one, we slipped away from the campsite and made our way to the place Rick had mentioned, the old abandoned factory. The thrill of the adventure and the secrecy of our mission made my heart race with anticipation. I was overcome by a queasy feeling. The building had been abandoned for years. The windows were smashed, and the wind howled through the open halls like the weeping of lost souls. Rick and the others entered in with excitement, their voices echoing through the empty rooms. We entered an old, dusty room that looked haunted, adding to the eerie atmosphere. There was a pile of old newspapers on the floor. My friends had made a fire in the middle of the room. "Come and sit down. It's about to get exciting," Rick said with a grin that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. As I stepped closer, he pulled an old, tattered book out of his jacket pocket. We summon spirits. Have you ever done this before? I wanted to back away, but something held me in place. Was it curiosity or the fear of being excluded if I left now? Rick began to read from the book, his voice echoing unnaturally in the old walls. Around us, the wind began to blow harder and the flames of the fire danced wildly. Had I just made a mistake by coming here? As Rick continued to read from the book, the atmosphere became more and more oppressive. The walls of the factory building seemed to move closer, and the shadows moved restlessly. Then we heard it, a soft whisper that reached us over the crackling of the fire. The others didn't seem to hear it, or they just pretended nothing was wrong. Rick paused, looked straight at me, and whispered, "Do you hear that? They've come." The whispering got louder, a mixture of many voices, so old and suffering that my hair stood on end. I wanted to scream, to run away, but my legs were paralyzed. The voices weren't speaking to me, they were speaking through me, making my body tremble. "Let's get out of here," I managed with difficulty. Rick just laughed. "This is just the beginning. Wait and see what happens next." Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the lights we'd brought with us began to flicker. A cold breath passed through the room, and the flames of the fire shot up as if to summon something. "They're here," Rick said, his eyes shining in the eerie glow of the fire. Suddenly, I felt something cold touch my hand. I looked down and saw a translucent, old hand reaching for mine. I cried out and tore myself away, stumbling backwards and falling to the ground. The others laughed, enjoying the spectacle, but for me it was pure horror. I scrambled back on all fours until my back hit a cold, hard wall. "That's enough," I gasped, but the dark ceremony was far from over. Despite my pleas, Rick continued to read from the book, and the atmosphere grew more menacing with each passing second. The voices became a deafening scream that echoed in my head. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The screams penetrated everything. In a moment of clarity, I realized that I had to flee before it was too late. With the last of my strength, I jumped up and ran towards the exit. The others shouted after me, but their voices were drowned out by the noise of the howling spirits. I felt the cold wind whipping through the broken windows and hitting me in the face as I slammed the door of the factory building behind me. I raced back through the forest, my heart pounding, until I reached the campsite where everyone was sleeping. Trying to calm my racing heart, I quietly slipped back into my sleeping bag. Eventually, Rick and the others returned, whispering among themselves. We all settled down and tried to get some rest. The next morning, the trip came to an end. We packed up our things, boarded the bus, and headed back to school. When I finally got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of what I had seen. The eerie atmosphere of the abandoned factory, the flickering flames, the sinister whispers stayed with me, casting a shadow over everything. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the memories clung to me, refusing to let go. I tried to understand what had happened. Was it real or just my imagination? Was I close to madness? I spent the following days in fear and terror. Every noise, every shadow made me flinch. I avoided Rick and the others, ignored their messages and calls. I knew that I never wanted to be part of such nightly rituals again, but the experience wouldn't let me go, and deep down I knew that something hadn't been completed that night. Weeks passed, and although I had cut all ties with Rick and his group, I couldn't shake the events of that night. The memories haunted me in my dreams, and I often woke up in a cold sweat, the echo of the ghostly voices still in my ears. One evening, as the wind beat against the shutters of my room, I heard it again, the whispering, quiet and persistent. I sat upright in bed, listening intently and trying to calm my pounding heart. The whispering grew louder, an unintelligible whisper that slowly formed itself into words. "Come back," I heard a voice say, as clearly as if someone was standing right next to me. I jumped up, switched on the light, and searched the room. Nothing, no intruder, just the familiar shadows of my furniture. The next day, I decided to confront Rick. I needed to know if he was also hearing these voices, if he was also haunted by them. I found him in the schoolyard, surrounded by his friends. The look on his face when he saw me was serious, almost worried. "I thought you didn't want anything more to do with us," he said. "Do you hear them too?" I asked directly, without beating around the bush. Rick looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted, "they won't leave me alone. Ever since that night, it's like we woke up something that doesn't want to go back to sleep." The realization that I wasn't alone brought little comfort. Rick suggested that we go back to the factory building to give the ghosts a message to leave us alone. The thought of returning filled me with dread, but part of me longed for closure, for a resolution to this nightmare. With hesitant steps, I followed Rick back to the abandoned factory building. Dusk was settling over the city, and the last rays of the sun colored the sky a gloomy red. My heart beat erratically as we opened the old, rusty door again. The room where we had performed the ritual was just as deserted and eerie as before, but this time, the sense of menace was more palpable, almost as if you could grasp it with your hands. Rick pulled out the old book again and turned to a page he had bookmarked. "Here," he said, pointing to a paragraph, "there's a spell that might be able to call her back. Maybe we can end it all that way." I nodded, unsure if I really wanted to believe his words, but what else did we have to lose? He began to read the words out loud, his voice trembling slightly. With every word he uttered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop and the wind began to howl through the broken windows. The atmosphere thickened, and suddenly it felt as if dozens of eyes were watching us. I held my breath, waiting for a sign, some kind of reaction. When Rick spoke the last word, all the noises suddenly stopped. An oppressive silence spread, and then, without any warning, the flashlights we had brought with us flickered and went out. The next moment, voices filled the room, louder and clearer than ever before. "Why have you returned?" asked a deep, resonant voice that made my blood run cold. Rick replied in a firm voice, "We want you to leave us alone. We've come to finish what we started." The voice laughed, a cold, heartless laugh that cut through marrow and bone. "You cannot finish what was once begun. You are a part of this story now." An oppressive heaviness weighed on my shoulders as the words of the ghostly voice reverberated. It seemed as if the air itself condensed, holding me in place. Rick and I exchanged a look of despair, both caught up in the realization that perhaps we had delved too deeply into something far beyond our understanding. "What do you want from us?" I dared to ask, my voice shaking despite my attempt to appear strong. The silence that followed was oppressive before the voice spoke again. "Peace. Only peace. You have disturbed us, and now we demand that you pay the price." The darkness around us seemed to thicken, and for a moment, I thought I saw shadows moving around us, taking on shapes that could have come from a nightmare. I felt Rick grab my hand. His fingers closed tightly around mine. "There's always a way," he whispered. Taking a deep breath, Rick found the strength to look into the book again. "There's another saying, one for bonding and peace. Maybe we can calm her down with that." His voice was determined, even if his hands holding the book were shaking. He began to read again, this time with a determination that gave me a little hope. The words were softer, almost pleading, and as he read, the wind began to die down, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive darkness slowly lifted. When the last word had faded, a changed silence fell. It felt as if the world around us had held a long, expectant breath. Then the voice came again, quieter this time, less demanding. "You have spoken the peace. We will let you go. But do not forget what has happened here. Do not forget the peace of the forgotten again." With trembling legs, Rick and I stood up, the book clutched tightly under his arm. We left the building, which now seemed less threatening. Dawn was just breaking, bathing the world in a soft, forgiving light. As we walked away from the old factory, I couldn't help but feel a weight lifted from my shoulders. But the knowledge that we had become a part of this dark history would probably stay with me forever. Rick looked at me, a tired smile playing around his lips. "We made it," he said simply, and I could only nod, unsure of what the future held for us now.